the silver medal in the European Time Trial Championships with a power output of only 5.6 watts per kilogram. See, and people say, well, 5.6. I mean, there's amateur riders that can do that. Yes, there are amateur riders that can do 5.6 watts per kilogram for 45 minutes or whatever it was, but they're not going to get a silver medal in the European Time Trial Championships.
They can't do that power output in the position that it allows them to be that aerodynamic.
Right. Ben Healy doesn't have particularly impressive power numbers, but he's quite an impressive bike rider, and that's based on efficiency. He's a very fatigue-resistant and efficient bike rider. One, he's aerodynamic. Two, he's lightweight. Those leading to being efficient, but very, very aerodynamic. And then three, he's just as good after 5.5 hours as he is after an hour and a half. And so those three things lead him to be able to be a very successful bike racer, especially out of breakaways. But like Ben Healy in a laboratory is...
How do you go about finding those gems then that have the fatigue resistance? Because I guess we went through a period, I know you always had your finger on the pulse when it came to the latest scientific training, the use of power meters in the early days, etc. There must have been a huge temptation at a point in the sport to look at the laboratory results, to look at what some of these FTP power to weight ratio was. How do you separate those that have a huge VO2 max or a fantastic power to weight over 1 hour versus the likes of a Ben Healy or even an Uran, I think, that you said is also not hugely physiologically gifted compared to those he's getting similar results to? What is the process with that?
Well, it's more complicated for sure. I mean, just going in and doing a VO2 max test or a 20-minute power test is pretty simple, and anyone can figure out the result from that. When you get into this more subtle things like how fast you recover overnight, how aerodynamic is your body sort of naturally, and then what can we twist it into on the bike and eventually train you to be. Then there's psychological aspects, then, the bike handling aspect. I mean, Peter Sagan, I would say, probably wasn't from a lab testing perspective overly impressive, but the amount of energy Peter Sagan would save in a 6-hour race out of every single corner that he didn't touch his brakes and everyone else did, like that over 6 hours adds up in this massive thing. So the answer to your question is it's really actually hard to figure those little subtle points out. One thing that we have implemented is that when we test what we'll consider an up-and-coming talent, when we bring them in the laboratory, we do sort of 3 days of testing. One is a normal VO2 max test. Then we do sort of more of like a glycolytic power test, which is pure anaerobic power test. Then we do a lactate metabolism test, which is this very long, like 2-hour test where we're steadily ramping up the power and then seeing how they're metabolizing lactate. And then lastly, and most importantly, we're doing a degree of aero testing. And, we're seeing big differences between riders that, this rider can do 6 watts per kilogram and this rider can do 6 watts per kilogram. But this rider, even at 30K an hour on a climb, needs 20 watts less because, their shoulders are narrower and their hips are more flexible. And because of that, you can see how these guys in a laboratory look exactly the same, but one of them is winning races and the other one isn't.
Well, that's the physiological side of things. On a psychological side, how much effort, if any, and how much importance do you place on the tactical development of riders? How much do you put into a race debrief about where riders went right and wrong, how to improve that? Or do you rely just more on race radio, team director, tell him what to do, he has to do it?
No, I mean, ultimately, the really successful riders have to have good tactical sense on their own because, okay, so we're looking at this view on TV right now. The team car is 500 meters behind that. So they don't actually know what's going on in the front.
And probably 30 seconds behind the broadcast they're seeing as to actually when
30 seconds behind delay on the broadcast and we're in the south of Italy, if you're even getting a signal in the team car. So the team director at this moment in the race could, I don't know that they are, but very well could be entirely blind. Like they have no information. So then what are they relying on? They're relying on, the race radio, which is useless. And they're relying on the intelligence of the riders. So, no, the riders do ultimately have to make the call of, is it time to go now or is it time to go now? We can give them as much information as we have available to us, but they've got to figure it out on their own still, even in this day of radio communication. What's interesting is pulling guys out, and this has happened multiple times with me and with other teams, is pulling guys out that win a lot of U23 races. A lot of times your best U23 riders are very good at just sort of sitting at the back of the peloton, waiting for a certain hill, passing the entire peloton, never fighting for position, just going passing 180 riders, then, you know, racing at the front for 45 minutes and then finding the right moment to attack, and boom, they attack and win the race. Well, you can't do that in the pro ranks.
No.
And so a lot of times, since they were successful at winning races doing that as a junior, they're successful at doing that at races as a U23, all of a sudden it just doesn't work in the pro ranks anymore. And so it's very difficult to figure out whether you've got, you know, a super talent like Evenepoel. I mean, he actually was so good at doing just that like it still does work in the pro ranks, but not many.
We're watching the first intermediate sprint of the day. I would imagine that was Andrea Pietrabon. It was going through there first. He sits in 5th place overall in the intermediate sprints competition. I think he might have just taken himself up to first because he was only 5 points behind Filippo Fiorelli. He started there on 22 versus Pietrabon's 17. So Maestri allowing his teammate to roll through that in first. We'll turn our attention to the sprint behind, Robbie, because with just 2 riders up the road, there are some significant points on offer for those behind. 12 and 10 have been taken, but 8 down to 1 for the rest.
Yeah, and you can see them starting to mass at the front. Of course, Alpecin de Koning with Caden Groves.
Well,
is kicking off now with, well, Lidl Trek with an early and long lead out for Jonathan Milan. It looks like Caden Groves is just going to slot himself, still behind his teammates. So letting Milan at the moment a good 4 positions ahead of him. Olaf Koy onto the wheel of Caden Groves, down around 10th wheel. Here comes Alpecin de Koning up alongside Lidl Trek now. And Groves they're going to guide him to the wheel of Milan or try their own lead out, because at the moment he's still a long way back. Lead out for fresh air behind the quick step rider. Merlier is slotted in further back.
Well, this is an exceptionally fast lead into this first intermediate sprint of the day. Caden Groves still with 1 teammate just in front of him, Ed Plancart, who's launching his lead out now. Milan's going to have to go from slower speed by the looks of things. He's going to get boxed in if he's not careful here. Thankfully, Consoni moving out of the way. And here goes the drag strip race to the line. Tim Malier on the right-hand side, coming from completely out of shots and taking that with relative ease in the end. It was all about Milan and Groves from the overhead, but I think both of them got picked by 2 riders there. Merlier on the right for Soudal Quickstep, and Olaf Koy down the centre for Visma Lease Bike.
Well, the 2 main guys with teammates were sort of their own worst enemies. Lidl Trek went from so far out, had nothing left, and even in the end, I think it was Gianni Vermeersch? No, Edward Plancart, sorry, as you said. Plancart with a lead out for Caden Groves ended up being very early as well. And they both propped at the front, and Tim Merlier thought, well, that's all in the invitation I need. He just kept it rolling in the slipstream and just blasted straight over the top as the other 2 were sort of propped and waiting to start their sprints. As we see it back, that was a very long way out for Lidl Trek.
They tried to spring a surprise, didn't they? But the others were quick to react.
Yeah, for a very long time, Caden Groves was 4 positions behind Jonathan Milan. This is Jasper Stuyven. And at this moment, Plancart goes on the right, Groves easy in the wheel, then it's Koy and Merlier. Milan is just caught in between the wheels for a moment, but here it props. And before they really get going, Merlier was in a big gear and already just getting it rolling, maybe just half a pedal stroke earlier than the others, but carrying that momentum, rolling out of the wheels, coming out of the slipstream over the top. And although he says he's stiff and sore from the crash that he had during the time trial the other day,
it doesn't seem to be affecting him too much, does it? Quite close between Malier and Milan, between Koy and Milan for 2nd place of the rides in this peloton. Might have to wait for the confirmation of that one to see who did indeed get 2nd place behind Tim Malier there. It was almost like Milan just gave up when Malier came past and suddenly realised he still wants to get as many points as he can. He did a bit of a bike throw there, but he'd stopped pedalling 20 metres or so before the line.
He sort of gave it up and then thought to himself, oh, hang on, if I do this, the others will pass me too. So you just got to make the best of the situation. And little mini throw to the line for Milan. It's still well in front in the Ciclamino Jersey competition.
Well, not long now, actually, until the 2nd intermediate sprint. They all come thick and fast on this particular stage. It arrives with 55.5 k's to go. It's 23 from where the breakaway are now. Although Milan, in his interview pre-stage, did say he might not go for that one because it's close to the hill zone. Yeah,
he already talked about saving energy through that sprint, because the end of this stage gets really quite tough.
rider who's really fatigued, first they're eating just to like survive. You know, they need the energy for the moment, just to get through that moment, just get through the next day. So maybe they're overeating a little bit just to do that. But secondly, they're also inflamed. I mean, they're puffing up and they're retaining water because of the fatigue, which happens on the rest of it.
15 years after my first Grand Tour, this explains why I put 4 kilos on at the Giro d'Italia.
Yeah, yeah.
The speed is up, or at least it's up versus what it's been for most of the stage. The gap to our leading duo out front, 2 riders from Team Polsi Cometa, is down to 1 minute and 40 seconds. We have Mirko Maestri and Andrea Pietrobon, should I say, who set out bright and early on today's stage. We expected a huge fight to get into the day's breakaway. That did not materialise, but that might well mean that the finale to today's stage is more exciting because of it. If you've been away on an ad break, you've missed a very interesting piece of information from Jonathan Waters of EF Education Easy.
Since it's really just searching for sugar all the time and not running very efficiently on fat, because you're the guy suffering on the wheel, you're not the guy that's just noodling along like Pogacar, your body will actually start converting protein into glucose, right? And when it does that, there's a tendency for it to want to replace that weight with fat. So it's like it's guarding itself from the damage that you're causing your body. It's actually fighting back. It's actually not saying, I'm going to adapt to this, I'm going to get faster. It's actually going like, no, you're trying to kill me, so I'm going to make you fat and slow so you stop doing this.
I'd never heard that. It's very intriguing. Did you ever put weight on during a Grand Tour, Robin?
No, I didn't.
You weren't fatigued enough, clearly.
I just wasn't harder. I just wasn't inflamed, I suppose. I was certainly fatigued.
There's inflammation right there on his elbow.
We'll get back to that shortly, but first up,